Hello and welcome to Real Life Faith, episode 19. My name is Chris. I'm one of the pastors here at Fairview Church. And if you don't know what Real Life Faith is, this is an online experiment in discipleship. And this is based around a book that we've been working through together. Some groups here at Fairview have been working through this book, and it's called Banding Together. And it's just a process of going through different parts of the Bible, exploring what they mean, figuring out how that applies to our life. I think that's the big focus, is figuring out how these things, these stories that occurred so long ago, how do they apply to our life? So if you would like to receive a copy of Banding Together so that you can be a part of this podcast that happens every week at Monday at 8:30, by the way. You don't have to watch it in real time, but that's when we usually upload those, is Monday evenings at 8:30. And you would like to be a part of that and take part, I can send you one of these books. You can send me a message to 937-265-2218 or at revchrishall@gmail.com. That's my email address. So we're going to get right into it, and I'm just going to open in prayer for our process here, our time here. Lord, I just ask that you would be a part of what we're doing, that we would hear your message, that we would receive it, and that your word is for all people of all time. And I just ask that you would help us to figure these things out well, and to learn from what you are trying to teach us, not what we might misinterpret or any of that stuff, that we hear your word from you. And we just ask all this in your name, Jesus. Amen. So if you're working through the workbook with us, you'll see that there is an agenda, and you can do this agenda if you want to do one of these types of gatherings with other people in your life. We could get you those books and you could do that, but you would find inside one of the opening covers, there's these questions, if you will, and it's kind of our agenda, if you will. And so I'm just going to start off by asking these questions. How many days this week did you read your Bible? And this is not for any kind of test. You're not getting a pass-fail. It's nothing like that. It's just a question for you to reflect on how you did this week. How did you hear God speak this week? And I'd ask you to share a journal entry down below, but also, if you had something going on in your life that you said, wow, I felt God in this moment. I'd like to hear about that. I had a couple of those moments this week where I just felt I was doing something mundane, and I felt God speak into it. And I'll spare you for the length of this recording, like what that was. But it was just one of those enjoyable scenarios where I was just like, I wasn't even processing God in that moment. I wasn't even thinking like, God, how are you speaking to me in this? It was just one of those moments where he began to speak, and I wasn't even in a place of prayer or anything like that. It was just God doing his thing. And did you have any questions from your reading this week? And that reading, if you go and look at this week, this is happening on July 13th. By the way, this is episode 19. Did I mention that at the beginning? I always like to say what episode this is. So this is 19 weeks in a row we have done this podcast. So thank you to those who've been a part all the way from the beginning. But this is our week's reading that we went through, and there's some tough stuff to deal with. And I'm not going to dig down into everything. There's some tough stuff to process in Exodus, and we just have to be honest about that. And I'm not going to dig down into that. This really isn't the platform for that. But I am going to go through all 7 days and try to just pick out some of the things that made sense to me, that triggered something in me, or just God spoke to me in a way, and we're just going to go through that. So we're going to look at day one. Day one of our reading was Exodus 11 and 12, and I kind of skipped Exodus 11 because that's just kind of on the tail end of the plagues and the Israelites leaving Egypt, and just kind of the end of that story, and didn't want to dig down too deep into that, but I wanted to dig into Exodus 12:17, where it says, "Celebrate the festival of unleavened bread, because it was on this very day that I brought your divisions out of Egypt. Celebrate this day as a lasting ordinance for the generations to come." And this is something a lot of churches do to this day. during the Passover is we have unleavened bread, and part of that was it was a very functional thing. They had to get up and go right quick. I mean, it was let's get up and let's get out of Egypt. There was no preparing. There was no like having days to like get ready and everything. And so some of them literally carried their dough that had not had yeast added to it, the leaven that they would add. And so they're literally carrying this unleavened bread and just packing it up and putting it in whatever and carrying it on. So, it's all part of that stuff. So really interesting. If you go and look at the history of unleavened bread, we won't dig down into that for the sake of time in this. But it's just one of those things that sometimes we glaze over things and we don't understand the significance of it. And I think it's important sometimes just to let that significance flow over us, if you will. So I'm going to go on to day 2, Exodus 13 and 14, and I had two different, I had one from Exodus 13 and one from Exodus 14. So this is 13:17 in Exodus, and it says, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country. That was shorter, for God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. Now, you would wonder, why was that so particular? Why did somebody think to include that? And the Israelites were taking part in a long journey. They were departing all of their comfort, everything they knew, and they were going to where they didn't know where God was leading them. They just knew that they had to go. And God didn't want them to run into any major friction along the way, because sometimes we want to take that easier path. Sometimes we want to take the easy road, and if we meet resistance, we might fall back into our previous way of doing things. And he knew if the Philistines came up against them, they might be like, well, you know what? It was better back in Egypt. Let's just turn around and go back and be disobedient to what God was asking them to do. So even though that path was shorter, he was taking them another route. And I think it's just cause for some reflection. Like, have I ever found myself in that place where I'm like, I'm going to take the easy road because this direction looks way harder, or I'm going to run into something that's I just don't want to deal with that noise. So there's something to think about in that, of like looking back on your life at those times where maybe that happened, and maybe it took you to a place that God was trying to draw you out of, and maybe that's something to learn from for the future. That's where I look at it now. Sometimes we can look at those things and kind of beat ourselves up, like, oh, I should have done this or should have done that. No. That's not what that's about. It's about learning from those experiences, being aware of them for the future, and going, sometimes the longer path might be better, because if I hit a little bit of friction and want to go back to where I was, maybe that's the right way. I don't know. I don't know how that speaks to you. I know how that speaks to me, so I just wanted to bring that up. So we'll go on to the next day, which was Exodus 14. And in Exodus 14, verse 12, it says, didn't we say to you in Egypt, these are the people grumbling against Moses, and didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Now, they're complaining about not having enough food, not having enough water. They're kind of coming at Moses like, hey, we were comfortable where we were. And I think the way this feeds into our life is, are we in a place of comfort, but not in a place where God wants us to be? Are we in a place where God may be saying, I want you out of here to go here? And we can complain about the trip. We can complain about the roughness. We can complain about the things that we don't like about where we're being called to go. But God's got a plan for us. And that's what he was doing with the nation of Israel, is he had a plan for them. And I would put that to prayer if I were you. Is God calling you to a place that takes you out of a place of comfort and to a place where you're serving him in a way you've never thought possible before? I would put that to prayer if I were you. I mean, every one of these is something to pray about. And I think there's something to learn from everything and things to draw out of it. Now, I don't mean to make all these about us. I don't sit there and read the Bible and try to make it about me. That's not what I do. But there are great lessons that we can draw from these things and learn about how we conduct our own lives. So, something to think about. Going on to Exodus, this is day 3, going on to Exodus 15 and 16. He said, if you listen carefully to the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Now, this is a message spoken. This is part of that covenant that God had with Israel, and this is kind of what we call the Mosaic covenant. And it says, if you do this, I will do this. And if you listen carefully to your Lord, your God, and do what is right in his eyes, pay attention to his commands, and keep all of his decrees, then I will do this. Now, that's old covenant theology, but I think there's some wisdom there to listening. How is God guiding you? How is God directing you? And are you listening? I mean, I think there's something very functional in that when we're listening to God, when we're following his guidance, I think things go better for the most part. That's just me looking at my own life, that when we make those right decisions, now I know a lot of people could argue what's right, what's wrong, I'm not going to get into that, but there is something to be said for living according to God's ordinances. And now we're not under that covenant because we have Jesus, but so it's not a conditional covenant anymore. But I still think there's something very functional to hearing God when he's guiding us and kind of following along with what he's telling us. I always tell my boys that, like being a parent, and I think this is the relationship God has with us, being a parent's kind of like if you've ever seen somebody like show a pig at the fair, you just kind of tap it with a cane. You're not smacking it. You're just kind of tapping it on the chin, and so it knows which way you want it to go. And I think sometimes God's doing that to us. Now, I don't mean to compare us to a pig, but sometimes God's doing that to us, guiding us down the good path. And it's when we make those bad decisions that seem good at the time that we get ourselves kind of off of the plan that God had for us. And it's when some things happen that we may not like. So that's just one of those things for our own good. But I'm going to move on to Exodus 16, and this is verse 20 in Exodus 16. It says, the Israelites did as they were told. This is, when God was presenting them with manna and the quail. And the Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. Then Moses said to them, this is one of those instruction times, no one is to keep any of it until morning. However, some of them paid zero attention to what he was saying. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was very angry with them. It goes back to what I said about the previous thing. There are those times when we are given instruction and we try to pay no attention, put that on the pay no mind list, if you will, and go our own way, and things don't play out the way we want it. So I think that's one of those things that I draw out of that. Like, which crowd would I be? Would I be one of the ones that was like just gathering what I needed? Would I trust? Or would I be one that was like, man, I'm gonna want some of this as a midnight snack, or I might want this a little bit before breakfast and cause issues and then get Moses mad at me. So moving on to day 4. This is from Exodus 17:3, and this again, there were some grumblings going on. And I can't imagine if you're traveling on foot with a whole bunch of other people, you're in the desert, you have no idea where you're going, you don't know what the destination is, you don't know, you're not getting a break, you're out in the sun, all this stuff. And it says here that the people were thirsty and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt and make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst?" And of course, that was not going to happen. But they were uncomfortable and they were making their discomfort known. And I think sometimes we can walk in life alongside people who grumble and who are dissatisfied with things, and they will go to that far extreme of what probably isn't going to happen anyway, and try to make the story out to be more than what it is. And that's the kind of stuff that Moses was dealing with. And I think it's an eye-opening thing to us. Like, how many times have I grumbled? How many times have I been the grumbler and not trusted? And if you have something like that in your past, again, I'm not saying this to like harsh on anybody or be a jerk. It's just one of those things that I think we pay attention to, learn from, figure out how to maybe do it better the next time. So also in day 4, Exodus 18, this is 18:20, it says, "Teach them the decrees and instructions and show them the way they are to live and how they are to behave." And there's something very functional in all this. You know, you can make it very theological, or you can just look at it as very functional too. And I think it's okay to take both perspectives on there. That when we're being instructed in the way to go, maybe it's something to listen to. You know, we can be tempted by the things of the world. We can be tempted by things that aren't of God's plan, and we will live out the consequences of those actions. And so sometimes it's best to learn from those mistakes before we make them, and find a way to behave and get in line with where God is leading us. Moving on to day 5. Exodus 19:5. "Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant," now again, this is the old Mosaic covenant, "then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession." And this is a reminder of that old covenant. We don't live under this covenant, mind you. Sometimes people in their theology don't realize that there are some Old Testament covenant messages that were fulfilled in Jesus and no longer stand as like the standard, because Jesus has fulfilled that. And so this is just a reminder that when we're reading some of this, we need to understand who it's being spoken to, when it's being spoken, how it's being spoken, and the why behind it, and not always try to live up to a standard or fulfill the law, if you will, in all ways, because we're not up in that covenant, and God doesn't hold us to that. You know, like if we do this, He'll do this kind of stuff. And also on day 5, Exodus 19:20, this is from 20 verse 7, "You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses His name." Now, this is part of the commandments, and it was just kind of the one that stuck out to me. Like every time I read through Exodus, I see something a little bit different. And thinking about the ways that people misuse the name of the Lord their God. Some people use the name of God in their political agenda. Some people use the name of God to like swear at people, and there are all sorts of ways that we can misuse the name of God. We could falsely testify and be doing it in the name of God, and that's a misuse of His name. And so something to be aware of and what that means. And there are a lot of different ways that we can do that. And I found this, I don't even remember. I need to give credit to whoever wrote this up. These are not my words, but it was a thing I looked up. It's like, how is this commandment broken? How is this empty speech and profanity? Using God's name lightly in casual expletives or in unserious context. Faithos, like I was saying, like swearing falsely by God's name or using His name to guarantee a lie. Misinterpretation. Theologians note that because God placed His name on His people, identifying them as His representatives, misrepresenting Him through sinful or unloving behavior is the most profound violation of this command. You know, sometimes people will state things as if they're presenting it from their faith perspective when they're really peppering their opinion with faith. And I think we see that a lot. I think we see that a lot in people who believe that they have all the answers and that they have no demarcation point between their opinions and their theology, that they believe they're one and the same. And sometimes we get that wrong. And I think it's something we have to be aware of, that when we are misusing our identification as Christian to solidify a point we're trying to make or whatever. There's a million ways you could present that, but that's something I think we need to pay attention to and be reverent, if you will, of how we are representing God in the world around us. Day 6, this is Exodus 21, and this comes from right at the beginning of Exodus 21. And this is something you will see pop up from time to time on social media. People will make comments, and it says, if you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years, but in the 7th year he shall go free without paying anything. Now, is that saying that the Bible is endorsing slavery, like chattel slavery? And that is not the case. That is not what it's saying here. And it gets very, very misunderstood because people don't understand the culture at the time and issues surrounding that. And so this is more of a servitude, and like an indentured servitude kind of arrangement. In the culture, people would basically hire themselves out. Like somebody, person A says, I'm going to pay off person B's debt. I'm going to pay off everything that they owe and get them out of debt, and then they'll work for me to work off that debt. And what this is saying is that, you can only do that for up to 6 years, and he shall go free in the 7th year. Now, where the math may not work out is somebody's debt that they paid off may well exceed that 6-year servitude. And if their debt amounts to like 20 years of servitude, that doesn't matter. And that's what this passage is telling them, is you don't hold somebody in that like just ongoing servitude for an extended period of time. Even if it's 10 years, 15 years, whatever, it's a wash, and you let it go, and it's the gift you give to them as part of getting them out of the debt they were in. Now, people who would pay for that, they would know that going in. They would know they're not going to get their money's worth, so to speak, from our using our language, that if somebody has 10 years worth of debt that you've paid off, you want to get 10 years out of them. But that's not the case. And that's where the gift comes in, that they would basically give them their life back and in exchange for some work, but it was not to go beyond that 6-year period. So that's what that is. That's not the Bible saying slavery is okay. That's a totally different concept than what it is. So anytime you see people like kind of trash talking the Bible because it says slaves are okay, that's not what that is at all. Going on to day 7. This is Exodus 23 and 24. And Exodus 23:2 says, do not spread false reports. Do not help a guilty person by being a malicious witness. It's like, do not bear false witness is what that says. And I think we have an added responsibility in today's culture to where we plant our flag, or where we set our anchor, however you want to say that, wherever our position is on things. Sometimes people don't realize that they're bearing a false witness because they're working from false information. And we live in a day and age where there's just so much false information on the internet. And some people they'll die on a hill based on false information. And because it suits their political perspective or whatever. And I think that's something we owe ourselves to. We owe ourselves the truth, and we owe those around us the truth. And I think it's just so important that we never bear a false witness in any way, shape, or form, but especially when it's something that's going on where somebody's guilt or innocence is in the balance. that we should not be a malicious witness in that. I know I kind of got out on a tree branch and applied that in a different direction, but when something's going on, we have to pursue the truth and never falter from the truth, even if we don't like it, even if we disagree with it, even if it's something that we kind of oppose from our opinion or our politics or whatever, that we should always stick to the truth. And finally, day 7, this is from Exodus 24, and I can't remember what verse this was because I didn't write it down here, but it says, "Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people." This is after Moses has come down off the mountain. And they responded. He's reading all these things to them, like, this is what God's telling us to do. This is how God is telling us to conduct ourselves. And the people responded. Now, they were grumbling just not too much before this. But they have seen God. They haven't seen God directly, but they've seen the cloud descend on the mountain, and they've seen things going on. And I think they're in a better place mentally, and they're willing to go along with what's happening. And they responded, "We will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey." And these are people just like us. These are, even though we're separated by thousands of years, these are still people that are just like us. And I think there's sometimes that we have to say, "God, I will obey." I heard a pastor say years ago that when he wakes up in the morning, he just says, "Yes, Lord." And even if God hasn't asked him to do something, he's already said yes to what God is asking, so he can't take that back. And I think that's something to consider. That's something to pray about. So that brings us to the end of our reading. We have another part of our agenda here that I like to go over every time, and it's just a series of questions for you to reflect on. These are not right-wrong questions. These are just questions for us to all reflect on. So the first question is, how is it with your soul? Are you at peace? Are you having anxiety? What's going on with your soul? And if you have something you want somebody to pray with you about, I'll send I'll put some content, some information at the end of this video where you can contact us and we can pray with you about that. The second question there is, what are you celebrating? Not if you are celebrating. Find something to celebrate. Where are you struggling or being tempted? And how has the Holy Spirit been speaking to you? Number 5 there is, do you have any sin to confess? Number 6 is, have you been angry, fearful, or anxious, and why? And do you need to reconcile with anyone? That's question number 7. And I'm intentionally going slowly through these, so if you need to pause and process and pray, feel free to do that. And number 8 there, how well are you loving those whom God has placed in your life? That doesn't necessarily mean family. That doesn't necessarily mean strangers. It's anybody who's been placed in your life. So the last few questions here, who are you praying for this week and why? And if you'd like somebody to join you in prayer for that, I'll have my email and phone number here in a minute. Who are you praying would surrender their life to Jesus? And who is someone that you could start a discipleship group with in the future? And like I said earlier, if you would like to receive one of these Banding Together books, and you can text in at 937-265-2218 or email me directly at the email address there on your screen. And for next week, if you would like to be a part of episode 20, this is what we're going to be covering next week. And if you see something in advance that you say, hey, I would like to talk about X, whatever that is, insert here. Like, I see this thing in Exodus 33 that I don't understand. Can you talk about it? Or, or I've got this question about this thing. I would like to hear from you on that. And if you have one of those questions, I would like to go over that. I would like for that to be part of what we do, is go over the things that you, humble viewer, would like to see covered. So if you have anything like that, please send it to me. Let me know what you think, and I'll do that. That's my commitment to you. So thank you for being a part of episode 19 of Real Life Faith. Again, this is a ministry of Fairview Church. That's where I'm sitting, in case you're wondering. Fairview Church in Englewood, Ohio. And if you're from the greater Northmont community or any of the towns around here and you're looking for an awesome church with awesome people, I have found that place. I mean, I came here from another movement and another church, and so I'm still one of those people that gets to see things through a set of eyes of somebody who has come into this family. And I will tell you, it's lovely people. And so if you're looking for that, if you're looking for a nice small church full of lovely people of peace, I can attest that is Fairview Church. And so that's my little testimony there about Fairview. But thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for being a part of episode 19. And if there's any thoughts or ideas that you have that you would like to see in future episodes of Real Life Faith, again, you can send me a message, 937-265-2218, or at my email address down at the bottom of the screen. Thanks for watching. God bless.